family while you focus on wellness. Marin Treatment Center, fighting addiction since 1976.
And breaking news coverage continues. This is the news on CNBC. I'm Shepard Smith in New York on a sad night for our democracy. Law enforcement officials say a woman shot inside the U.S. Capitol has died after a pro-Trump mob stormed the halls of Congress. They've now been cleared from the building. It's a scene once unimaginable in America. In fact, unimaginable this morning. The president's supporters invaded the Capitol as lawmakers prepared to affirm Joe Biden's victory. Senators, House lawmakers, and Vice President Pence all rushed to secure locations. The National Guard eventually deployed to clear out the rioters who'd been there for hours and stop the assault on democracy. The FBI now confirms it disposed of not one but two explosive devices. One was, as they put it, a pipe bomb-like device at the headquarters of the Republican National Committee. The House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the decision has now been made to reconvene and, as she put it, get the job done tonight once the Capitol is cleared for use. The images inside the Capitol have been stunning. Police officers, guns drawn, barricading the door of the House chamber, holding the mob at bay as they tried to smash their way in. Rioters making themselves comfortable on the Senate floor. Look at this. They also invaded lawmakers' offices, sitting at their desks. President-elect Biden is calling it an insurrection right before the mob descended on the Capitol. This is what the President of the United States told them.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about.
Well, NBC's Josh Letterman was there at the time as paramedics with a heavily armed police escort rushed a severely wounded and bleeding woman into a nearby ambulance. Josh Letterman is with us now live from the Hill. Josh, as the cameraman works to get your shot set, tell us what you can about the day.
Well, it was a harrowing scene that has played out throughout the day, as you have been recounting, Shep. And as you mentioned, we did witness earlier today as a stretcher was brought into the U.S. Capitol on the House side, and then just a few minutes later, a woman brought out on that stretcher as medical workers were trying to resuscitate her. There was a lot of blood, clearly a very significant injury, as we did learn of a gunshot wound within the Capitol, and then shortly thereafter, NBC News reporting that that gunshot victim in the Capitol has died. Now, an investigation being led by Metro Police in Washington is underway, as is a broader look at what went wrong here in Washington today, that the Capitol Police, that other law enforcement authorities were clearly so unprepared for the situation that played out, leading to the U.S. Capitol being breached and essentially occupied for several hours by protesters. Just in the last few hours here outside the Capitol, police have tried to retake the scene. They have pushed protesters and rioters away from the U.S. Capitol, but there are still large crowds that are gathered kind of on the periphery, waiting to see what happens next, even though a curfew now in effect here in Washington, D.C., announcements on the loudspeakers that anyone still out here on the streets is subject to being arrested. Shep?
Oh, Josh Letterman reporting. I thought he was waiting for a soundbite there. My apologies. Some breaking news has just happened, and it is a stunner. Twitter has just blocked the President of the United States. President Trump is no longer permitted to tweet. They have locked his account and are not allowing. This is what I'm being told by producers in New York, or in Englewood Cliffs. Please confirm that. I'm seeing in his Twitter account now that certain tweets are no longer available, but what I'm being told is that the president is no longer allowed by Twitter to tweet. That was the information that I just received from our producers in Englewood Cliffs. If that's inaccurate, I'll let you know shortly. The president has been pressed to issue some sort of response. He recorded a video midday where he made more false claims about the election and then told people to go home. Facebook and YouTube took it down because, in their view, according to the companies, it has the risk of inciting more violence. And then in just the past hour, the White House called a lid, which means we won't see the president at all tonight. NBC News political reporter Monica Alba live in Washington covering the president. Monica, what's going on inside the White House now? Do we know?
Well, this was quite a surprising development, Shep, that lid you refer to, which means we're not going to hear any more remarks from the president on camera today. Of course, we saw President-elect Joe Biden speak to the chaos and violence in our nation's capital earlier this afternoon. And it's notable that instead we heard from, for all Americans, a message from the incoming president and not the current one, partially because his lies, the president's inaccurate information and false and misleading claims, is what contributed in large part and stoked this unrest. Of course, the president spoke for nearly an hour and a half earlier today when he attended that rally just steps from the White House, and again continued to reiterate these baseless claims of voter fraud for which there is no evidence, continued to lean on his vice president, urging him to try to do something he absolutely doesn't have the constitutional power to do. And then we saw these remarkable scenes unfold on the steps of the Capitol with those then later protesters and that mob breaching the doors and entering even the Senate floor and beyond. As we continue to see that for hours, the president was pretty silent during that time. He issued a couple of tweets that were really very confusing, partially supporting the people who were doing this on Capitol Hill, and then ultimately issuing some messages to urge them to go home or to scale back. But in that video message that you referenced at the top, it was slapped with a Twitter label we've never seen before, which in effect meant nobody could reply to it, retweet it, they couldn't like it. And in the words of Twitter, that was because his words could incite violence. Now, other tweets that the president has released in the last hour or so, as you mentioned, have been scrubbed entirely for the same reasoning. We are also trying to check and see what else is happening with the president's account. But the fact that the White House has said we don't expect to hear from him, we have absolutely no idea what's going to happen in the hours to come. As that joint session of Congress reconvenes, we might still hear from the president. That social media platform is really usually the #1 way he communicates with people. So if that's what he's going to be doing as he continues to react. But some other really notable headlines this afternoon and into the evening, Shep, as we know, the full D.C. National Guard has been activated due to this violence. And very notably, it was Vice President Pence who was in direct communication with leaders at the Pentagon to get that going, and not the president, Shep.
Monica, thanks so much. And we have clarity now on Twitter, and our report is accurate that we will not hear from the president tonight on Twitter, at least not for the next 12 hours. Here's what's happened. The account of Donald Trump will be locked for 12 hours following the removal of the tweets that Twitter deemed incite violence. If the tweets are not removed, the account will remain locked. In other words, if the president goes to his Twitter account and removes the tweets that Twitter has deemed that were inciting violence, and we've been through some of them today, if he does that, 12 hours later, he'll be able to tweet. Here's what's happened. The president's direct line of communication, at least through his platform of choice, has now been eliminated. And at least until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, and maybe for much longer, you will not see a tweet from President Donald Trump. Remember, Congress had a job to do today. That job was to count the electoral votes and formally declare a winner to the presidential election. Instead, lawmakers were given face protection, forced to cover on the floor of the House of Representatives. The threat so severe, some were forced to evacuate. President Trump's supporters broke into their offices, roaming free, putting their feet up, rummaging through their desks, we're told, leaving a message saying, "We will not back down." See that? One scene a Democratic congressman called insane. CNBC's Eamon Javers is with us again live from Washington. Speaker Pelosi saying the House will reconvene tonight. Do we know when?
We don't have any sense of timing just yet, Shep, but they are determined, they say, to push forward with this today. And the question is going to be, what level of support now is there going to be for objections to the Electoral College count from those Trump loyalists in the Republican Party who stood with him this morning and were standing with him at the moment that protesters broke into the Senate chamber and into the House chamber during the debate. And those senators, as you say, had to be scurried off to an undisclosed location for their physical safety. Will those Republican senators continue to support the President of the United States? We'll find that out later tonight when they reconvene in the joint session. That is the House and Senate meeting together. That was taking place on the House floor earlier today. We'll see whether they have to move that to a different location or if they can secure physically the safety of the House floor in terms of any potential devices or objects left behind by those Trump loyalists who stormed the building today. Another question open at this hour, Shep, is what's going to happen in terms of the White House staff. They are said to be shaken by the president's conduct during the course of the day today. And as I just told you, I've spoken to a former White House official who tells me that a number of mid-level Trump White House officials are discussing resignation in the wake of today's events. There's concern on their part that they may be criticized for doing too little too late. Those officials do not expect any senior level Trump resignations, but that is something to keep your eye on as well over the coming hours, given the level of angst inside the White House. I'm told there's as many as a half dozen who have discussed that possibility today, and we'll see if any of them move forward with that, Shep. So Washington tonight shaken. The foundations of democracy certainly shaken. Tomorrow is a new day, and we'll see where we go from here, Shep.
Thanks so much, Eamon. Any reporting on whether those in the House and Senate who were objecting to muck up the works for their show on the Hill, whether any of those objectors will stand down from the objecting so that the process can move forward, or is that something we have to wait and see on?
We do have some reporting on some of those folks who the support seems to be receding a little bit. We've got a statement here from Kathy McMorris Rogers who says, what happened today and continues to unfold in the nation's capital is disgraceful and un-American. Thugs assaulted Capitol police officers, breached and defaced our Capitol building, put people's lives in danger and disregarded the values we hold dear as Americans. To anyone involved, shame on you, McMorris Rogers said. She says, we must have a peaceful transfer of power. The only reason for my objection was to give voice to the concern that governors and courts unilaterally changed election procedures without the will of the people. I've been consistent in my belief. She says, I have decided I will vote to uphold the Electoral College results, and I encourage Donald Trump to condemn and put an end to this madness. So Kathy McMorris Rogers, a prominent conservative Republican in the House, saying that she is now going to withdraw her objection, and she will now vote to uphold the Electoral College results, Shep.
Very good. Eamon Javers live on Capitol Hill. We'll see, or in Washington, we'll see if any of the others follow along, and we'll let you know should the work of the House or the Senate begin. The horror we were seeing today was not a surprise to a lot of people. The former Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel predicted it just 2 days ago. During an interview, he said, and I quote, President Trump keeps inciting people, and that's very dangerous because you could have bloodshed. Secretary Hagel is live with us now. He led the Pentagon under President Obama from 2013 to 2015, also served in the U.S. Senate. Mr. Secretary, we had requested your presence tonight to talk about the future and how governance would go forward, and now here we are. Your thoughts on what we've witnessed?
Well, Shep, thank you for having me, and I listened to the last half hour of your show, and I think all the words used by your reporters and others to describe this situation are all accurate. I suppose if there's one word that captures it for me, is shameful. It's an embarrassment. I've talked to friends, people all over the world today, and they're all stunned. I've talked to my Nebraska friends. I've talked to friends all over this country. The same thing, stunned. They can't believe this is happening in this country. But the reality is, Shep, some of us, and I'm not the only one, some of us did see the potential of this happening. And it just didn't start last week or the week before. This is the consequence of the last 4 years. And when a country goes through what we've been going through and has no leadership and no trust and confidence in its institutions, and we have a leader of a nation who continues to define institutions like the media as enemies of the people, well, what do you think will be a conclusion? There will be something that will happen and it won't be good. And I think this very much is the conclusion of that. I hope the conclusion of that, at least to get this country back together again so that we can function and respect each other and do what republics must do, democracies must do. Because the last point I'd make here, the foundation of a democracy is its electoral process, a peaceful transfer of power. And if you doubt that, you question that, and you try to overthrow that or change that, you've just riddled democracy.
Mr. Secretary, Vice President Pence's office has just informed us that the Vice President is back at his position in the Senate, that he never left the Capitol. At the same time, the House is trying to move forward with its work. At the White House, though, as you described it, inciting violence, and now the president has been blocked from Twitter. What is a democracy to do about a president whom you say incites violence?
Well, we have 14 days, I believe, left of this administration. Long time. There is one legal recourse, that's the 25th Amendment, which I know the different individuals have talked about, legal scholars have talked about. That would require the vice president initiating that with more than half the cabinet to essentially remove the president with the concurrence of the Congress. That's an option. We've never tried it before. We've never had a reason to. But because this is so unprecedented, we've never had to think about it. But the 25th Amendment was put in place. I suspect, I wasn't there when they did it. It's a fairly recent amendment, as you know, within the last 50 years, to deal with all situations. So that's one option that we would have.
Well, you know Mike Pence. Can you see him doing that?
No, I can't. But I would ask you this question. Could Pence have envisioned what just has happened in this country the last 12 hours? And can he condone it if it gets worse? If a president continues to incite this kind of violence and continues to behave in erratic, dangerous ways?
You were one of the 10 secretaries of defense who signed on to that letter. There has to be something we don't know. Why did that letter? Why did we get that letter?
Well, Shep, I've been asked that question. Is there something deeper? There's something behind that. Something drove it. To my knowledge, I've not spoken to all my former Secretary of Defense colleagues. I've spoken to a number of them. There wasn't any one thing. It was an accumulation of just the environment of the actions of this president, not just the last 30 days since the elections, but more prominently, this loose, dangerous talk about the Insurrection Act, employing that, ordering military martial law in this country for the military to conduct new elections. That kind of Oval Office talk, the seriousness of that talk, and then all of the other conversations that we know of, and many we don't know of, led us all to, I think, a point, first of all, of real concern. Second, I think we all felt we needed to give our tremendous professional military leaders, every man and woman in the military who takes an oath of office to a constitution, our constitution, not to a president, not to a commander-in-chief, not to a political party, but to this country, rule of law. We need to support them on that. We need to back them up on that, because this president might try to incite even further use in ways of using the military to direct the military to do certain things. we felt that we needed to say something about that to show support for the military and remind them of their constitutional responsibilities, and also to remind citizens of what this is about and the seriousness of the issue and what could potentially be maybe one of the most serious actions in the history of our country.
Sir, all the best. Chuck Hagel, we appreciate your time and your input and your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Shep.
All right. President-elect Joe Biden was scheduled to talk about the economy today. He had wanted to stay above the fray, according to his campaign, but then the chaos. So instead, the president-elect delivered a nearly 8-minute speech during which he denounced what he called an unprecedented assault on our democracy.
This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now. I call on this mob to pull back and allow the work of democracy to go forward.
And as he gave those remarks, protesters stood on the very scaffolding set up for his inauguration just 2 weeks from today. NBC's Mike Memoli in Wilmington, Delaware. Mike, the president-elect knew he'd be inheriting a country divided, but there's no way for anybody to have been prepared for this.
That's right, Shep. The Biden team heading into today knew all the attention was going to be on Washington and the counting of those electoral votes. They went ahead and scheduled an event on the economy anyway. The best case scenario, sure, he might not get the kind of coverage they would want, but it would give him an opportunity to show what they've been trying to convey throughout this transition, that he is ready to take the reins of government. But the worst case scenario is exactly what we ended up seeing play out. And the fact that the Biden team had this event scheduled gave Biden an opportunity to come out and very strongly denounce what he called a siege on the U.S. Capitol, saying it called for some soul searching. Take a listen.
And this god-awful display today is bringing home to every Republican and Democrat and Independent in the nation that we must step up. This is the United States of America.
As Biden finished those remarks, he told reporters that he was confident that he would still go ahead with an outdoor inaugural, as you say, on those very steps of the Capitol that those rioters were demonstrating on today. Tomorrow, Biden will still, we expect, unveil the team that will be tasked with overseeing law and order in a Biden administration, and that includes his selection for Attorney General Merrick Garland. Shep.
Mike Memoli, thanks so much. We're now an hour and 20 minutes into D.C.'s citywide curfew. We've seen lines of officers at barricades. The scene not as hectic as it was earlier today, but the crowd still not fully dispersed. And finally, there's the live picture. About 5 hours ago, rioters used so-called chemical irritants on the officers, according to the police, to get into the U.S. Capitol. In fact, that's from the D.C. police chief himself. And some new video shows just how dire the situation was for law enforcement inside the building. See this? This officer here chased through the halls. Let's listen to this. Chased through the halls of the Capitol. Listen to this. The mob chasing the officer. Let's bring in Terrence Gaynor, former U.S. Capitol Police Chief, also a former Sergeant-at-Arms of the U.S. Senate. Terrence, the U.S. Capitol Police is made up of more than 2,300 officers and civilian employees and has an annual budget of nearly $460 million. How the hell did this happen?
Well, we're going to have to figure that out, Shep. I am happy that they have already cleared the Capitol and made it ready to commence more legislative business. I know the chief very well. He once worked for me when I was a deputy chief of D.C. He's a good man. The House and Senate Sergeant-at-Arms are very good people, well adept. I suspect that they had a plan, and they probably wanted to do more security around the campus, put up maybe fences like we would have done on inauguration. I don't know what approval or pushback they got on that, but I do know that there was a problem. We lost the steps. We lost the upper levels of the Capitol, which permitted these the mob to get into the building, and that's a failure. But I will say this, Shep, I think You have to remember that the primary responsibility of the officers inside of the Capitol is to protect the members and the staff and the process. And they at least took very good care of the members and the staff, even if it was frightening for them. So they worked with the Secret Service to get the constitutional officers out of there, and then did their best to guard the both the staff and the members. That's a positive. It's a negative that they got into that building.
Well, I mean, no, come on, no, good Lord. We're sitting here, we're saying they did a great job after the Capitol got overrun for the first time in the history of the United States of America, and we're saying, oh, once it got how lucky are we that no one in there had a long gun to go in? Or how lucky are we that no one from ISIS got the same intel that we did, that a bunch of people were going to storm the place? It's something of a miracle that nothing absolutely horrendous happened today. And also, who knows what it is that any of those ne'er-do-wells left in that place? We don't have any idea what kind of gifts they left behind, besides the notes at the desk. It's unimaginable that we saw what happened there.
I am not touting that it was a good job done. I have said there was a terrible mistake. I said that once they got in there, that the officers, to the best of their ability, shielded the staff and the members. I also know this. I would have thought it would take about 24 hours to completely sweep that Capitol to make sure there's no one hiding out in all the nooks or crannies, or that they would have been looking with canines to look for explosive devices. They've said they've done that. I trust them on that. There'll be plenty of time to re-examine and persecute the people who missed defending that place. I used to do that. I know these people. We're responsible. Something got screwed up, and someone will be held accountable.
I now question, I'm guessing many Americans question the security in general, because it's not like they had some sort of level of sophistication as far as we know. I mean, DCP says that they came up with some sort of chemical irritant. What does that mean? Pepper spray or something? And I don't know what that means. I just know that once they got in, we have pictures of them scaling walls over here and walking up over there with their flags and sitting at desks with their feet up. It's like we all knew something was coming, and they clearly were not ready. And I don't understand why. Do you?
Well, that's what you got to figure out. If I was then like I say, I was the chief for 4 years and 7 years as the sergeant at arms. I was responsible for security. The police board is responsible. We need to figure out what went wrong. I saw before this began, the Capitol Police were on the east and west front. They got pushed back to the steps. Then they lost the steps, which got the people too close to the skin. That's something we feared. We had proposals on how to prevent that. But at this time, something went wrong. I admit that. If I was up there, I deserved to be fired for letting that happen. I was so embarrassed and ashamed to see what was going on.
So do you think the person who is in charge should be fired?
Pardon me?
You said if you were there, you should have been fired. Then, according to your own reasoning, the person who's in charge there now should be fired, right?
Well, I said that because I knew what I would have failed. I don't have all the information of what they may have had, what intel they had, or what they wanted to do, and leadership wouldn't let them. I think that's a question to be asked.
Well, here's where we are. Sorry. Here's where we are now. They've now been allowed back in, heavily armed. They're heavily armed guards, and an assault team is on standby by the Senate floor. That's what we're reduced to. Also, I know everybody involved with terrorism investigations knows terrorists are always looking for ways to exploit our vulnerabilities. Look what they just got shown today. You want to get into the Capitol, bring some chemical irritants. You go inside there and sit behind the speaker's desk if you want, over on the House side, or sit over there in the majority lead. It's just beyond into the exclusion of belief.
Emphasizing the chemical, whatever it was. That was.
DCP said that to us.
We lost control of the levels that got them up close to windows. That's what happened. How they broke the windows, how they get in, how they stormed that door has very little to do per se with some spraying CS or something. That was a danger to the officers, but there was some other breach that you and I at this moment don't know how they did that, other than it should not have happened. and someone will be held responsible.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Thanks so much, Terrence Gaynor, former DC Police Chief. Appreciate your time as we watch live pictures there on Capitol Hill. There's a curfew underway. There's been a curfew for an hour and a half. Take it full, please. A curfew for an hour and a half. And this, well, I'm just going to look over there then if you won't take it full. They're still out there. They haven't been able to regain control in any way. There's a curfew in Washington. It's just lawlessness in Washington. And every step of the way has been astounding and unimaginable. And now we realize that you call a 6 o'clock curfew, and by 7:30 you can't clear it out in the capital of the United States of America. As the president's supporters breach the halls of Congress today, Democrats gain control of the Senate. NBC News projects Democrat John Ossoff has beaten the Republican David Perdue in Georgia. The 33-year-old will be the youngest Democrat elected to the Senate since Joe Biden in 1972. And in the other race, the Democrat Raphael Warnock edged out the Republican Kelly Loeffler. Warnock actually was a larger margin here. Warnock will be in the state's first black senator, the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, Martin Luther King Jr.'s church. Now the Senate is equally split 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans, so the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will hold the tie-breaking vote. The Senate belongs to the Democrats. Priscilla Thompson, NBC News, live at Lawrenceville, Georgia for us tonight. Priscilla, the victory there completely overshadowed by the chaos in Washington, but what's the reaction from the candidates today?
Shep, entirely overshadowed. Reverend Warnock was able to come out last night and deliver his victory speech to Georgians and Americans, and John Ossoff did the same this morning, actually, before his race was called. But by the time his race was called, that was when we were getting the first pictures of this extraordinary these extraordinary events that were unfolding in Washington, D.C. And so these candidates were largely quiet on Twitter today, not seeing those celebratory tweets we might normally see, instead having to issue statements about what is happening in Washington, D.C., and taking two very different approaches to that. We saw Reverend Warnock tweet a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. writing, quote, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that," encouraging people to let their light shine in this dark time. Meanwhile, John Ossoff had very firm words about what he's seeing happening, calling this an insurrectionist attack, and saying that it was incited by Trump's poisonous lies and flagrant assault on our Constitution. He called on the GOP to disavow Donald Trump and ensure that there is a peaceful transfer of power. And I should point out what their Republican opponents did as well. Senator Loeffler did release a statement disavowing the violence, though she did not say whether she still intended to object to the certification of these results, something that she announced earlier this week she did plan to do. And meanwhile, David Perdue has not said anything as all of this has been unfolding, and we have reached out to his campaign, and it has been radio silence on those incredible pictures that we're seeing out of Washington, D.C. And I want to circle back to what you mentioned in your intro, the historic nature of these wins. Georgia has not sent a Democrat to the Senate in 20 years. Reverend Raphael Warnock will be the first black senator out of Georgia, and not only will John Ossoff be the youngest since Joe Biden, but also the first Jewish senator. So really a remarkable feat here that has been overshadowed by these just extraordinary things that we're seeing in our nation's capital tonight. Shep?
Indeed. Priscilla Thompson from NBC News, thank you so much. Some breaking news now. Earlier we reported that there was talk of potential resignations in the White House in the wake of all of this. Eamon Javers is live with us now. Eamon, what have you learned?
Yes, Shep, I've learned that the First Lady's spokeswoman, Stephanie Grisham, has resigned today. This was, I'm told, in part due to the events of today, but I'm also told that there were long-running issues that Stephanie Grisham was experiencing inside the White House. This was, I'm told, though, in part in response to what we saw unfold today. And I can tell you that there are as many as a half dozen, I'm told, mid-level White House aides who are discussing resignations in response to what happened on Capitol Hill today and the president's conduct of today. Stephanie Grisham is a long-serving White House aide. She was, of course, the press secretary for the President of the United States. She was moved from that position to the position of spokeswoman for the First Lady, Melania Trump, some time ago. And she's been with the president since the very first days of this administration. I remember speaking to her very early on in the administration. When I first met her, she came into the White House as a passionate believer in the Trump cause, a passionate believer in the president himself, spoke about him with emotion, and believed strongly in what she was doing there and what the president was doing there. That has ended today. She has resigned as the First Lady's spokeswoman, and we'll try to get more detail for you on what exactly transpired this afternoon in the First Lady's office. Shep, back over to you.
Eamon Javers on top of all of it live from Washington. Eamon, thank you. One woman is dead after she was shot inside the United States Capitol today. It happened this afternoon as hundreds of President Trump supporters breached the building. Crowds still gathered outside that building, even though Washington is under a citywide curfew. Police arrested at least 15 people and 8 others taken to a hospital. That's from the D.C. mayor's office. Staff and press have now been allowed back into the Capitol. The Senate expected to reconvene in about 30 minutes from now to declare Joe Biden the next president of the United States. It will take time, though. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has also announced that the House will meet again tonight. Local coverage now. NBC4 Washington's Shamari Stone was right there in the thick of it all as the pro-Trump mob stormed the building, and we actually dipped in on some of Shamari's coverage for NBC4 in Washington. Shamari, for that, thank you. An update on all you saw today, if you could.
Well, Shep, thank you for having me. We just actually received another one of those emergency alerts on our phone when you were speaking, reminding people about the 6 p.m. curfew that has been enacted by D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. I am on the east side of the U.S. Capitol, on the Senate side, and as you can see, there are 2 officers here along with several officers throughout the area, and they have their tactical gear, their visors, the shields, their batons, making sure that people do not breach the fence right here. And Shep, you know, I was listening to your show and you were explaining how people were able to get access to the U.S. Capitol. I want to show you something. Look at this right here. This is like a bike rack. You can see that it's moving. And what happened, I was here, we can roll video. This is when people knocked this rack over and then stormed the steps at the U.S. Capitol. Many of them angry. They say that Trump, without any evidence, won this election. That is what they believe, and they were very furious after the president finished his speech at the Ellipse, and they swarmed up the steps, got access inside of the Capitol. And then moments after that, around, I'd say a couple hours, that is when they swarmed the media that was over there, and they were knocking their equipment and stomping on it and cleared out the reporters. Shep?
All right. I can't thank you enough, Shamari. Thank you. With us now, the retired Major General Paul Eaton, now a senior advisor at the National Security Network. Sir, thank you. National Security Network. Security today, your thoughts?
Shep, thank you very much for that, and thanks for the invitation. Actually, I've changed jobs. I'm now a senior advisor to Vote Vets, a great outfit, and our mission is to get veterans elected to high office. And one of the folks that we have worked with, Jason Crow, was on the front line today after we saw the United States of America allow a very high-value target to be breached at the request implied of our commander-in-chief. So we have shown incompetence in defense of a very high-value target, and we have had the commander-in-chief incite violence, having this mob attack our police forces, and this man, Trump, is simply unfit to serve as president, to serve as the commander-in-chief. So it's been a big day today, and it's not been a good one for the United States.
Well, we appreciate it. I'm curious about the security part, though. You saw what happened. You saw the overrun of security. You saw protesters with their feet on the desks of senators. How do you even process that?
Shep, we have no idea how bad this is because we will not understand everything that came into the Capitol building. Who was there? Were they simply these thugs from the Trump base? Or are we talking about infiltration by other malign actors? We just don't know. But we had a failure of the outer ring security. We allowed, and one of your previous spokesmen talked about the breachers coming up to the skin of the building. We allowed a penetration of the inner ring of security, and then we allowed full access within this building. Now, Washington, D.C. is a patchwork of police forces. You've got the D.C. police, you've got the FBI police, you've got the print operation police, you've got the Secret Service, you've got the Capitol Hill police. This presents a nightmare to any commander who is looking for unity of command. And when you don't have a coherent series of bright lines, you are going to have chaos. And what we got today was a demonstration of a failure to have a coordinated defense of this very high target, our Capitol building.
Major General Eaton, thank you so much. Today laid bare the crisis facing the Republican Party. We've been reporting that it is in a sort of civil war. The question now is, where does the party go from here? CNBC's Kayla Tausche's in Washington. Is it even possible to calculate the damage for the Republicans today?
Well, not at this exact moment, Shep. There's going to be a lot of soul searching about where the party goes from here under the incoming Biden-Harris administration. But the first order of business is carrying out the certification and the count of that election, which was interrupted by that assault on our democracy at the Capitol. The spokesperson for the vice president tweeting that he was the one who facilitated the National Guard and coordinated the efforts to secure the Capitol with the DOD and DOJ, and saying that they are not now going to finish the people's business. Now, what happens when the Senate and the House gather again, reconvene to debate where they left off, which was the objections to the electoral counts in Arizona? Well, I've since learned from multiple Republican sources, both on Capitol Hill and in touch with many of these offices, that support for the effort to object to many of these electoral results has significantly deteriorated, that in the wake of today's events, that we are expecting to see very few senators and perhaps just a handful of Republicans in the House actually end up objecting to these. I've heard a few names, at least 2 names on the Senate side, who are expected to continue objecting, but still working on the exact sourcing to be able to confirm those names for you. But certainly it is reportable and accurate that the support for actually objecting to the election results has significantly deteriorated today. And another thing that is going to impact is the timing of all of this. Of course, it has been the message of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and many on both sides of the aisle that they hope that when they regather this evening, that they can carry out this effort rather expeditiously. Here is the senior senator from Mississippi, Roger Wicker, addressing that question earlier this evening.
Senator, you said they were looking to clear the objections, not
to have a debate, make sure people who have to still make their point, but expedite so that we can get out of the charged environment.
So there will be an opportunity for people to raise concerns if they have them, but the hope is that they will do so quickly. And certainly there are many in the Republican Party who are reconsidering the notion of whether it was safe to challenge the results of a free and fair election where states, where courts, and where voters all made their choices known, and those choices were sent to the Capitol. Finally, Shep, one note about where the senators, the Republicans from Georgia stand right now. You had Kelly Loeffler, who had been planning to object to the the results from Pennsylvania. And then you had David Perdue as well. Both of those Republican incumbents projected to lose those races by NBC News, flip the control of the Senate into Democratic hands. We have not seen either of them concede their races. Not only have they not said how they will participate in the electoral count, but we have not seen them concede their races, even though the numbers are in favor of their opposing candidates at this hour. So certainly there is a lot of hand-wringing among the Republican Party as they figure out their next steps and how to move forward. But certainly when we see them come to the House and Senate floors a little bit later on, I think you can very clearly expect the objections to have much less support than it did earlier today. Shep.
Kayla Tausche live for us. Kayla, thank you. 2 bits of breaking news to report to you now. We have just learned the Senate will reconvene in 15 minutes, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, that Mitch McConnell will begin with a statement of his own. We'll see if there is a break in any way from President Trump. I haven't been told this, but I'm confident we'll be here for that. In addition, Liz Cheney has issued, daughter of former Defense Secretary Cheney, Vice President Cheney, representative now, has issued, and powerful one really on the Hill, has issued a statement, a Republican, of course, though not a Trump supporter. She's just issued, the president incited the mob, the president addressed the mob, he lit the flame. Of course, it's a familiar theme that we've heard, throughout the day, that President Trump incited the mob. But to hear from Liz Cheney, the president incited the mob, the president addressed the mob, he lit the flame, is somewhat extraordinary. Michael Beschloss now. He's the NBC News presidential historian. Michael, we had planned to have you on tonight to talk about how the new government will function, how the system will work, and what history can tell us about it. And now we're at a place unprecedented in American history.
We sure are, and you and I never thought that we'd see a night like this, did we, Shep? We're in a situation where, the definition of terrorism is the use of violence, especially against civilians, to achieve a political aim. That was a terrorist attack on our Congress today, in our U.S. Capitol. And this is not a partisan comment. That was incited by the president, President Trump, who at midday gave that speech to that mob saying, march up Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol, take back our country, stop the stealing of this election. And then after they occupied the Capitol, and there's 1 woman killed so far and other violence used up there, he went into the Rose Garden and made a video saying to the mob that was up in the Capitol, we love you, we think you're very special. That's something that no president in American history would ever have done. Anyone else in something like this, a terrorist attack, would have tried to restore the peace as quickly as possible. Even tonight, I don't know what's going on.
We've watched aghast, for years as things like this happen in other places, 100% confident that nothing like that could ever, would ever happen in America. It's just not who we are. And yet, on a fairly regular day in the course of recent events, with Congress doing its thing, beginning the, quote, peaceful transfer, all of a sudden, everything we know just collapses. You realize now how fragile the whole thing is.
That's exactly right. And, this ceremony today, the counting of the ballots, is usually so perfunctory that you wouldn't even have referred to it if we had had our other talk tonight, more than in passing, because that's something we just assume is part of the peaceful transfer of power. What you've got is a president who is claiming that the election was stolen from him. It was not. He's desperate to avoid being thrown out of office, which he will be in 2 weeks. Presumably, he's terrified that he's going to have a lot of financial demands that he cannot meet. He may be overwhelmed with lawsuits and other legal troubles. He has a lot to benefit from staying in the presidency because he would have gotten a lot of immunity. So just for that, he's willing to throw our democracy potentially over the side.
I've been sitting here for 5 or 6 hours normally, or would have prepared for this interview, but it occurs to me that over the course of human events, maybe one of the hardest things for us to recover from was the division of the nation during the period of the Civil War.
Yep.
And do you have any reflections on that period of how we were in such strife and such trouble, and the way from which we recovered that might give us some sort of hope today?
Well, what it really depends on in our system, presidents have so much power. There's one figure in the entire system that the founders wanted to depend on to unify this country, which has all sorts of differences. They knew it then, we know it now, and that is the President of the United States. Donald Trump, his idea of leadership has never had anything to do with unifying this country. Go back to his inaugural address about American carnage. It has been about pitting groups against one another. And so coming from the other side, if you have a president coming in, and we have President Biden, who is very motivated to try to unite this country and bridge the kind of differences we're seeing, our differences are nowhere near what they were in 1860 or in 1932 or 1940 or even 1968. If you have a president who's trying to help things restore order, that goes a long way.
Michael, thank you so much. Michael Beschloss, NBC News presidential historian, friend of the program. We'll see you soon. FBI SWAT teams and hundreds of National Guard troops were on scene today. But before we talk more about them, I want to get to General Joseph Honoré. General Honoré is one who helped us out of the morass and the disaster that was the flooding of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina struck South Mississippi. And we're General, it's great to see you. We're in it's not the same kind of mess, but it's just as chaotic. And I wonder if you have any words of wisdom for us about how we might conduct ourselves as a group.
Well, first of all, to all those Trump followers, they need to go home. Number two, the president is stuck stupid 3 times recently. Once with the Bible, over the weekend with that intimidation of the politicians in Georgia, and then this morning going over to a First Amendment event where people get to protest peacefully and turning it into civil disturbance by directing those people to the Capitol to go shake it up and just about threaten the Vice President of the United States to do what he wanted him to do. The other failure on the top of that is the Capitol Police. The Capitol Police is led by a board. That board, Shep, is the Sergeant Arm in the Senate, the Sergeant Arm in the House. All 3 of them need to resign after the inauguration because they've done a lot of planning on the inauguration. They need to go. They allowed the perimeter to be broken. They did not ask for extra help from the interagency, which have thousands of police, including the FBI. And my recommendation to Senator McConnell and Ms. Pelosi is to appoint somebody to be in command of securing the Capitol, because that 3-person committee failed today. The officers were not well led. They gave up the perimeter, and when you give up the perimeter and you let the force inside the house, this was embarrassing. All they had to do is tell D.C. police, we want you to send over 400 officers. Tell the National Guard, we want 300 officers or 3,000. Or tell the Maryland State Police to send troops over. They gave the ground to the protesters today, and they trashed the House. Those 3 men need to be on retirement orders. But they've done a lot of planning for the inauguration, and now we need to put somebody over there tomorrow to secure the Capitol. And what you're seeing out there right now, Shep, is people standing on federal ground. If they're on D.C. Street, the D.C. police will arrest them. And we need to clean up the chain of command of how we command and control police in the Capitol area. We saw a big mess when they did the Bible event, and we see a big mess tonight because they're not coordinated. The D.C. area is set up to fight terrorists. There are F-16s above. There are Stinger missiles in the D.C., all designed on fighting terrorism. Well, guess what? Our biggest threat is domestic disturbance, like we saw here today, and they're not prepared for it, and they need to change because this is a case of super stupid, and I hope that the vice president will have a talk with the president tonight that he needs to calm down and basically focus on what he's going to do next, because he cannot be given any orders. He's still got the keys to the nuclear weapons. And he's telling citizens to go break into the Capitol. This is ridiculous, Shep.
It is pretty astounding that the President of the United States is no longer allowed to tweet, but he can set off a nuclear bomb. And now we've learned that the Capitol is completely vulnerable. A bunch of yahoos with Trump flags can go in and move over a barricade and sit up in senators' desks. Anybody who wants to do us harm, any cray-cray across this country who wants to go up there and cause chaos now knows, hell, I can do that. It feels like we need to get an army out there until they figure out what the heck is wrong with the place.
Well, my recommendation is to keep the D.C. Guard mobilized, because we cannot let this happen going into the inauguration. My recommendation to President Biden is scale down his inauguration. It shouldn't be about civil disturbance. Have the pass of the flag, go back to the White House and start taking care of business. We need to take out the ceremonies. And yes, are we giving it up? No, we're not giving it up. We've got to be higher than the people that are fighting against us. And President Trump needs to get out of town. And that is the big objective, because right now, if we allow them, they will escalate this. Some of these people just soon see a civil war. Look at that guy with his feet on Nancy Pelosi's desk. How stupid is that? And they're allowed to do this. I think in that leadership in the Capitol, there was some complicit behavior there. That there's people in there that downplayed the threat. Don't tell me the FBI did not know what these people are doing. What in the hell is that FBI's field office doing? It's their job to collect that intelligence. I know they've got these people infiltrated, and they allowed it to happen. But look, who's gave them order? The President of the United States told them to go do civil disturbance, go shake up the House.
Incredible. General Joseph Honoré, it's always my honor. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Russell, what did I say? Oh, my God. I'm sorry, sir. I've been sitting here for 6 hours without a commercial.
You've done good.
Lots of love, sir. Thank you. Hey, a programming note. We normally end here in about 3 minutes. We're not going to do that tonight because we now know that the Senate has plans to reconvene in about 3 minutes. It'll probably be a little longer, but that Leader McConnell is going to speak. And that could be big news, depending on what he says. You know how that goes. So we're going to stay right here. In the meantime, from inside the Capitol, NBC News contributor Jake Sherman is with us. We talked to you, it seems like a few hours ago now, Jake, and you were on lockdown in there. Same thing?
Yeah, listen, we have been all over the Capitol complex in the last couple hours. We were escorted by police to the House office buildings and kept in a room secured by the FBI and the ATF and the Capitol Police and all sorts of federal law enforcement agencies. And now we're back in the Capitol getting ready for Congress to reconvene, getting ready for Mitch McConnell to speak here in the Capitol. So it's the security is incredibly tight.
Knowing you, being locked in a room has not stopped you from reporting. And I wonder if you have any insight into what McConnell's about to do here.
I don't. I've been trying to get in touch with his people. They are obviously quite close to the vest. But if you heard what he said earlier today, I mean, he was pretty passionate about, and I'm not absolving him. I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just stating facts here that he was pretty impassioned about not objecting to the Electoral College because he thought it would be damaging to democracy. So listen, I think he's going to be pretty forceful. I mean, people are pretty upset, and I think they want to get this over with and move on with their lives.
Montana Senator Daines has just said there will be no objection from Montana, at least today. I wonder if it's possible that this might bring in a whole flood of change. I wonder if anyone from like Lindsey Graham's camp is saying anything, or if anyone from Line Ted, he used to call him, and now they're best buddies. Anybody from Ted Cruz's camp is saying anything.
Not at this point. I mean, Tom Cotton just came out with a very forceful statement, basically saying it's time for the president to move on. It's time for the president to accept that he lost and move on. I think, and Tom Cotton is as close of an ally of Donald Trump as anybody in the Senate. Listen, I think people are going to have to make a calculation. I mean, Senator Braun of Indiana said, "We've made our point. It's time to move on. It's time to put this ugly day behind us," is I think what he said, and I think that's what I think a lot of senators, a lot of members of Congress, and the top eight that I've spoke to think the same.
I'm sure they do, and we've been hearing from a number of people, but there is a certain amount of silence. Jake, I do have a couple more questions. I mentioned to our viewers that in just, a matter of seconds or minutes, Leader McConnell will bring the Senate back into order, which at least is a bit of a respite. It's 8 o'clock on the East Coast, 5 p.m. on the West Coast. I'm Shepard Smith in New York, and this is CNBC's continuing coverage of an extraordinary day in Washington. The House under siege, occupied by protesters, and now we wait for the Senate to reconvene. Jake Sherman is with us yet again, still in lockdown somewhere on Capitol Hill. You mentioned that there have been some changes, but it is in no way opinion to say that the show going on today has been farcical. It is without question and absolutely factual and reportable that Ted Cruz and Lindsey